Emily's there too? Oh, on prompter. I was thinking of, never mind. Hi, Emily, how are you?
Sure. Can I tap to make sure we're on the right microphone? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hello, hello. Let's do it.
Building a better Bay Area. Moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC7 News.
Good afternoon. I'm Karina Nova. You're watching Getting Answers live on ABC7. We're asking experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. As kids head back to school, that bedtime is getting earlier and in some cases more difficult. We'll dig into what you can do to help kids get more sleep and why it matters. Also, SF Standard reporter Anna Tong joins us to discuss why so many big companies in San Francisco are incentivized to keep their workers remote to avoid paying major taxes. But first, what's next for former President Trump after the FBI search at his Mar-A-Lago home? Joining us live now is Jessica Levinson, professor at Loyola Law School and host of the Passing Judgment podcast. It's good to talk to you again.
Good to be back.
First, let's get into the actual search. As of right now, we don't know exactly what the FBI was searching for, but we do know they needed a warrant to go in and get the documents or whatever it was. Can you please talk about that process of getting that search warrant? Because a federal judge did have to sign off on it, and that means there was probable cause to believe there was a crime committed. So can you kind of just go through that process of what needed to happen for them to go into former President Trump's home?
Well, that's exactly right. What you need here is a federal law enforcement officer swearing under oath, basically to two things. One, that a federal crime occurred, that there's probable cause that a federal crime occurred. And two, that there's probable cause that the evidence of that crime is where they say it is. And in this case, where is that? Mar-A-Lago. Then after that, after you have a federal law enforcement officer swearing to those two things under oath, you have a federal judge, as you mentioned, a magistrate judge independently looking at that information and saying, okay, there's enough there. You can execute a search warrant against the former president of the United States at his private residence. So there are a lot of safeguards here in place to make sure that what's playing out is a legal process, not a political process. Now, why would you need the search warrants at all? Again, this is more of hypothesizing. We don't know this for sure. But if the former president and his attorneys were voluntarily handing over this information, maybe you wouldn't need a search warrant. Or maybe there's more there beyond just taking classified documents. We don't know the full extent yet. The search warrant is under seal. We may never know.
And yeah, we've seen multiple sources report that the FBI search warrant was for Trump's handling of classified material. Can you go into more detail on that? Because as far as we know, as we do know, all presidential records are supposed to be transferred to the National Archives after the president leaves office. So was it classified information or documents that they were looking for? Have we confirmed that?
So I think the reporting is that we're looking at classified information. I don't believe that the FBI or the Department of Justice or the former president has confirmed that. Now, it's worth noting that the former president, who has said this is a political witch hunt, if that's true, he's the one who has the search warrant. He could provide that. He could publicize that and say, look, there's no legal basis for that. He hasn't done that yet. Now, with respect to, is the information classified? I would say for people who work at a private company, you might think of it this way. So on your last day of the job, maybe you take a stapler that you're not supposed to take. That's maybe unclassified information. But what if you instead take documents that have price lists, trade secrets, client information that you're not supposed to take with you? That's more of what we're talking about in the realm of classified information. That's why it's more serious. And it's worth noting that if, in fact, this is classified information, it raises national security concerns. There's a reason why this information is classified in the first place.
And in past cases, we know that the United States doesn't take matters of classified information lightly. If former President Trump did have classified documents at his home, what kinds of consequences does he face, could he face?
So if, in fact, he is indicted for these federal crimes and he's convicted, you could see potentially prison time. I believe that the statute that he's most likely to be charged under, if he is charged, would require or would, allow for up to 3 years in prison. One of the other things that a lot of people are mentioning is that the statute says you would also be disqualified from holding federal office. The reason I think that's not applicable is that actually the Constitution is the one that provides the requirements for being president of the United States. And the Constitution doesn't have a qualification that says, except for when Congress adds additional requirements. So I know there's been a lot of chatter about that, but I don't think even if he's convicted under this particular statute, it would bar him from running for and being elected to the presidency again.
That's interesting to know. And some Republicans are backing Trump, saying this is a political move by the Democrats. But we should point out that the head of the FBI, Christopher Wray, was appointed by Trump. And again, a federal judge signed off on that warrant. So what's your response to those arguments from Republicans like Kevin McCarthy?
I think it's very sad. There's no there there. This is a political argument, but what we're seeing play out is a legal process, as we discussed. So we have members of the Department of Justice, which, let's remember, that is an independent agency. Yes, the president, all presidents have the power to pick the attorney general, but the agency itself is and should be independent. That's why the reporting indicates that the Biden administration didn't even know the search warrant was being served until the rest of us knew. The Biden administration shouldn't be exerting any pressure. As you mentioned, the head of the FBI here was somebody who was picked by the former president. We have a federal judge signing off on this. It's just very sad that we're not looking at this investigation as what it is, a legal investigation, and instead we're putting a political spin on it.
And the U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland rarely discusses matters dealing with Trump. Do you think we'll get any more details into what the investigation is all about since the search warrant has not been made public? Do you think we'll get any insight anytime soon?
You know, I wish I had an answer to that question. It is possible that we wouldn't have more insight if and until either there are leaks, which there weren't in this case. I mean, this is not a leaky ship. If you think of all the people who were taken off guard and frankly surprised by this news, and or if there's an indictment, obviously the indictment would be public, but that's not something that I think would happen today, tomorrow, or next week. So there could be really a blackout period where we don't hear anything for quite a while. And that's how these investigations are supposed to happen. Again, this is not a political debate. This is not a political forum where everybody can turn on C-SPAN and watch what's happening. This is a legal investigation. It's very different.
And let's talk about the bigger picture, the overall picture of all this. A search like this at the home of a former president, this is unprecedented in the United States. What's your takeaway from all of this? I mean, it was shocking news for a lot of people to see that happen yesterday.
So I think it's great news that this is unprecedented because we don't want this to be normal. We don't want it to be normal that any federal office holders, any public office holders would be potentially subject and or part of an investigation into federal wrongdoing. Now, again, let's remember what we've seen so far does not indicate certainly that beyond a shadow of a doubt, the former president will be indicted. What it does indicate is that there's probable cause that a crime was committed and evidence of that crime was at his private residence. That is not a hop, skip, and a jump to he will be indicted. So we need to be careful about that. But already what's happened is without historical analog, and that is a big deal. And it is, again, really good that this is not normal in our country. We don't want this to be something that happens in every presidency. We don't want this to be a normal course of events.
And, some people would say this means that our system is working, right? To make sure that anyone does not have too much power where they can take something that is meant to be classified and not go through the proper channels per se.
I think really the question is, as you said at the end, it's not really a question of power. It's a question of no person should be above the law. And so I know there was some comment, there was some criticism yesterday. Well, this can happen to the president. It could happen to anyone. That's exactly the point of a neutral application of the law, that it should apply to everybody. Maybe you're the president, maybe you're somebody who could never even think of running for any type of office, let alone the highest office in the land. The law still applies to you. And again, that's the whole point of our system of equal justice under the law.
Right. Well, Jessica Levinson, thank you so much for your time today and your input, your perspective on this. I'm sure we'll be following up very soon.
Thank you so much.
Up next, it's a hot topic for parents. Do schools start too early? An expert says yes, and it's affecting the health of teenagers. She'll join us to explain coming up on Getting Answers. Welcome back. Kids are heading back to school, and that means after getting a break this summer, the earlier bedtime is back on. Well, it should be. But our teenagers are not getting enough sleep. Joining us live now is parenting journalist Lisa L. Lewis, who has studied and published the information parents should know. Thank you so much for being here, Lisa. We appreciate your time. First, let's get into how much sleep our teenagers need and how much most teens are actually getting.
Yes, hi, thanks for having me. So the official recommendations are that teens should be getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep every single night up until age 18. And the issue is that far too many of our teens are really getting nowhere near that amount. The most recent data actually from the CDC found that only about 1 in 5 high schoolers were even hitting that minimum of 8 hours a night, which really gives you a sense of how widespread this issue of sleep deprivation is among our teens.
Yeah, and we'll get to sleep deprivation and how it impacts teens in just a moment. I want to go back to 2015. You started looking into this in 2015 and found out those early school start times are a big problem. The CDC even has an article recommending middle and high schools start after 8:30 a.m. What did you find when you started looking into this? Do the majority of schools, or did the majority of schools start way earlier than that?
Unfortunately, yes. We have schools starting as early as 7 a.m. in this country and here in California. So my involvement did start in 2015, as you noted, because that's when my oldest, my son, was starting high school. That was the beginning of his freshman year. And at that point, our local high school started at 7:30 in the morning. And that just was very, very early. It was the earliest he'd ever had to go to school. It's the earliest of any of the start times in our district. So that is what propelled me into looking into this issue as a parent. And then as a parenting journalist, I started writing about it. And what I quickly discovered was that our community was not unique. Our early start time was not unique. And more importantly, to your point, the recommendations had just come out. In fact, the previous year was when the American Academy of Pediatrics issued its landmark statement recommending that middle and high schools start no earlier than 8:30 in the morning because of the implications that these very early start times have on our teens' ability to get enough sleep.
Well, and the start time might be 7:38, but think about some of the kids that ride the bus. I mean, I've heard of teens having to wake up as early as 5:30 in the morning to get on the bus at 6 because it's a long commute to get to school. And 5:30 in the morning, 6 a.m. even, is very early for these teenagers who sometimes aren't going to bed until midnight. So I do want you to talk about those implications that are tied to teen sleep deprivation. What did you find?
Absolutely. So one of the issues that I think is so important to keep in mind. So first, our teens should be getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep. Those are the official recommendations. But the other key piece is that when our kids hit adolescence, they have a circadian rhythm shift. What that means is that their entire sleep schedule shifts later. So melatonin is one of the elements that helps prime us to feel sleepy. It's a hormone that's released in the evening, doesn't subside until the morning, but that whole schedule shifts later. So melatonin is not released until later in the evening, doesn't subside till later in the morning, which means our teen sleep schedule shifts accordingly. So they're not feeling sleepy till about 11 o'clock at night. To your point, some of them aren't even going to bed at that time because of other things that they have going on. But then you just do the math. If they're supposed to be getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep, you can see how too early start times really make that very, very difficult.
Can you talk about why do our schools start so early? To me, it seems like a simple fix. Oh, okay, we just need to make it 8, 9 a.m. In your research, why do schools choose to start that early?
It was really interesting. In fact, I ended up with a whole chapter on that in my book, The Sleep-Deprived Teen, looking at exactly how did we get here? And our schools did not always start so early. It used to be that the common start time was closer to about 9 o'clock in the morning, but that did drift earlier over time. And there were a couple of contributing factors, suburbanization, the consolidation into larger high schools. But really, the main driver of that often was the buses that schools were using to transport students. So in an effort to streamline their budgets, these districts often decided to use just one fleet of buses and do staggered drop-offs and pickups for the 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high school. But at the time they were first putting these schedules in place, the research on teen sleep was not as widely known. So often by default, they put the teens into those earliest time slots thinking, oh, well, they should be best able to handle that. Well, now we know, we have the research. It is our middle schoolers and our high schoolers who have this circadian rhythm shift and this later sleep schedule. So if anything, in some cases, districts can literally do a flip. The caveat being, though, we really don't want any of our students going to school as early as 7 a.m.
Yeah, and your op-ed and your research did spark some change. We just have about a minute left. We know there was change made in California. Talk about that and what's your goal on a national level, and do you think something can be done?
Absolutely. Yeah, in fact, an op-ed I wrote on this topic did end up sparking our California law, and I got swept up in that whole journey. And that's the law that just went into effect on July 1st. We are the first state in the entire country to have a law that sets these minimum allowed start times, which I think is so important because we need to keep in mind teen sleep deprivation is a public health issue. And up until now, these types of decisions have been made at the local level. There have been districts that have made the change, but not enough of them have done so. So it really does seem like the best way to approach this and to really make a difference is to do so at the statewide level, the way California has just done.
And I know we have many more questions for you, like how do you get your teens to go to bed earlier or get more sleep? And your book does address all of that. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. Lisa L. Lewis, we appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, San Francisco's business taxes could be to blame for the slow recovery downtown. Our media partners at the SF Standard will join us to talk about that. That's next on Getting Answers. As San Francisco works to rebound from the pandemic, the city is trying to lure companies back to the office and bring workers back to downtown. But the recovery has been slow and offices continue to close. Our media partners at the SF Standard have published a new article finding that high taxes may be to blame. Numbers show companies are finding it financially better to continue having their employees work from home. Joining us live now to talk more about this is Anna Tong, the Standard's data editor. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
First, let's talk about the pandemic recovery. How has it been going from downtown San Francisco? In the last few months, have we seen any improvements of downtown getting busier or fuller?
Yeah, I know this has been talked about ad nauseum, but I'll talk about it again. I think there's been a little bit of recovery in downtown, but importantly, just compared to other metro areas, a variety of data providers are all pretty much finding that San Francisco is dead last when compared to the other major metro areas in the U.S.
And your article makes the case that San Francisco's tax system encourages work from home. Why is that? Can you go into some detail?
Yeah, so I'll go into the annals of the tax code a little bit, but SF taxes are based on a company's total revenue, and it's called gross receipts. And they basically multiply the gross receipts by the percent of the workers that are working from SF. So working from SF defined by working from home in San Francisco or working from an office in San Francisco. So as you can imagine, with working from home, most folks are now at home in the suburbs as opposed to at home in San Francisco. So that decreases the company's tax liability in a lot of cases quite significantly.
And you sent us a chart showing that San Francisco's business tax employee count dwarfs other cities. Why is that important, and what does that tell us?
Yeah, that's kind of a testament to how difficult it is, how complex the tax code is, because it just takes so many more employees to administer this very complex and burdensome tax code and to just explain how it works. And the tax code also changes quite often. So SF has had 7 new taxes, business taxes, in the past several years versus just one tax code change in San Jose and Oakland, so nearby cities. So the high number of employees that are required to administer this tax just shows how complex it is.
Yeah, you also looked into the local tax liabilities, comparing San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose. What did you find there?
Yeah, we just found that it's much lower. It's much cheaper to do business in SF. So we basically we did an estimate of Square Financial Services, which is a division of Block. It's publicly traded, so they have the revenues in public. And we found that in SF, if half their employees work from SF, it would be about $38 million. That goes down to $9 million a year for if they move to Oakland, and then to something like really low, like $166,000 a year if they moved to San Jose.
Okay, after looking at all of this data, which is very impressive, what do you think needs to happen? What should happen to get workers back downtown? Or do you think that could ever even be back to where it was?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question, and it kind of depends on what your goal is. Like, if we want to get as many workers back downtown as possible, first of all, I am not sure that is possible because, as we all know, SF is the tech capital. So most of our public companies are actually software companies. And those companies, the majority of them have told of the public companies have told their employees they can work from home forever if they want. So it's going to be really hard to get back to the level of pre-COVID. If we were to try to do that, we would need to probably implement tax cuts or incentives to get these companies to tell their workers to come back downtown. But then it's an open question of whether that's what people want. I mean, I know that especially pre-COVID, there was a lot of anger towards the tech industry for creating so much inequality in SF. So maybe people don't want there to be as many tech workers downtown, and that space could be filled with artists or restaurants or something different.
Right. Interesting point you make there. And I know you dig a lot more into this in the article. We appreciate your time and answering some of these questions for us here, but people can read your article in SF Standard, and you can check out more of the San Francisco Standard's other original reporting on their website, sfstandard.com. And ABC7 will continue to bring you more segments featuring the Standard's city-focused journalism. A reminder, you can get our live newscasts, breaking news, weather, and more with our ABC7 Bay Area streaming TV app. Just search ABC7 Bay Area and download it wherever you stream.